Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever time of day you find yourself in right now. First of all, I would like to start off by saying apologies for a little bit of a gap. I've been really ill for the last week and a bit. I've had the flu, not good, so apologies if my voice cracks a little bit as we go through this. Another apology, if you're like myself, you will watch a lot of YouTube crime people. I have been researching this case for the past few days when I've been ill. Wanted to talk about this one because I lived in the area this happened when this happened, but someone else in the community uploaded a video about this very case yesterday. It's like, no! So I could have not done it and just put nothing up, but I thought I'm going to put it up. Maybe you'll watch it, maybe you won't, but we shall see. This is the case of the Crossbow Cannibal, as you will already have known by looking at my title, Stephen Griffiths. Now, the area this actually happened in, outside of Bradford, was a little town called Shipley. Now, although I'm from Ireland, as you can probably tell, I lived in Shipley for a few years. I lived in England for 10 years altogether, and I actually lived and worked in the area where the bodies in this case were found and where the gentleman in question actually lived. The train that I will talk about later in the video that was subject to quite the grisly passenger, I took that same train journey myself on numerous occasions, so I could have been on that train. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't, but it sort of hits close to home knowing that on your own back doorstep, you know, this sort of thing's going on. So our story takes place between the months of June 2009 and May 2010. And 3 ladies would be killed just outside of Bradford in West Yorkshire. These ladies would be 43-year-old Susan Rushworth, 31-year-old Shelley Armitage, and 36-year-old Suzanne Blamires. The story begins on the 22nd of June 2009 with Susan Rushworth. Susan did have a little bit of a difficult life. She struggled with drugs, most notably heroin. She had separated, she had split up from her husband, which she found very difficult to deal with. She had some grown-up children that she had recently reconnected with. She was trying to actually come off the drugs, and she was actually on her way to the chemist to pick up a prescription for methadone when she disappeared. So things in Susan's life at that time did seem to be looking a little bit more positive. She was working really hard to get off the drugs and to stop working as a sex worker, and she had actually been clean from heroin for 5 weeks at this stage. So this particular day she goes to pick up her prescription from the chemist and she is never seen again. She is reported missing by her family. This is completely out of character. Even though Susan did have a drug issue and she did work as a prostitute, she was close to her family and it was completely out of character for her not to be in touch. So she was reported missing and the police did canvass the area. They did go to the red light district where she worked, spoke to other sex workers. No one had seen anything, no one had seen Susan, and it was almost like she had just disappeared off the face of the earth. The family also during this time try everything to actually find out what happened to Susan. Her brother goes to the red light district and questions different people. Again, nothing, they come up with nothing. There's just no leads, there's nothing to go on, and the case very slowly just fades away. So we move on to the following year. Susan still hasn't been found. It's 26th of April 2010 and Shelley Armitage, in exactly the same way, just seems to disappear. She is also a sex worker and she also has a problem with drugs and also alcohol. Again, she is working very hard to get through this. She is actually close to her family. She's very much loved by her family, very much given support. Her family have done everything to try and help her with her drug habit. And she is also on methadone and also working to come off the drug. She'd seemed to be quite positive of late also. She'd even actually bought herself a little puppy very close to the time when she disappeared. She was last spotted in Bradford city centre on CCTV. As with before, the police do question ladies that would have worked with Susan and Shelley. At this stage it's not completely clear if they put 2 and 2 together, if they thought that these cases might be related in any way. But again, as with what happened with Susan, they came up completely short. No information, no one saw anything. And again, the case just seems to fade away, to no one knowing what happened whatsoever. But this time the perpetrator, who we will later come to know as Stephen Griffiths, didn't wait those number of months. Less than a month later, on the 21st of May 2010, Suzanne Blamires would disappear in exactly the same way as the two previous ladies. But there would be one big difference. What happened to Suzanne Blamires would actually be captured on CCTV, including the person responsible. Suzanne was very bright and articulate. She was described by her family as a girl that was full of promise. She was studying to be a nurse, and unfortunately she just got caught in that spiral again of drugs, was trying really hard to claw her way out of that with the full support of her family. She was very much loved by her family. They tried everything they could to help her. She also, as with the previous two cases, did work as a sex worker to try and fund her drug habit. Our story takes us to Homefield Court Apartments, which is actually right in the middle of the red light district, most notably somewhere called Lum Lane. Now, if you're very much into true crime like myself, you will recognise the name Lum Lane, which is somewhere where Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, routinely actually went to find ladies, and as we will get to know, Stephen Griffiths was somewhat of a true crime fan, to the point that he idolised people like the Yorkshire Ripper. And it's no coincidence that he routinely went along Lum Lane to find young ladies to bring back to his apartment. Now, he did bring ladies back quite often for photographs, for whatever may happen in that apartment, but it wasn't unusual for ladies to go back with him. There would have been no reason that they would have been frightened, because he had brought ladies back to his apartment on many occasions. But on this occasion, he would bring Suzanne Blamires back to his apartment, and what happened was captured on the apartment's CCTV footage. Security guard Peter Gay was reviewing the CCTV footage of the apartments, as he always did. This would have been 48 hours after the event, and he was horrified to find captured on that CCTV the final moments of a young woman's life. That would be Suzanne Blamires. The footage shows a man, later found to be Stephen Griffiths, and a woman, Suzanne Blamires, enter the apartment number 33 on the 3rd floor, and very swiftly after entering, the young woman would be seen running from the apartment, pursued by Stephen Griffiths. Unbelievably, Stephen Griffiths is seen to be holding a crossbow, and he fires at Suzanne Blamires and initially actually misses. He drags her back towards the apartment, and horrifyingly for Peter Gay to witness in the footage, he is seen to shoot Suzanne Blamires through the head with the crossbow. He then drags her lifeless body back into the apartment. Not content with this horrendous act, Stephen Griffiths actually exits his apartment, walks straight up to the CCTV camera, raises his middle finger aloft with his crossbow held aloft in the other arm. Obviously not at all concerned with whether or not he's caught, with whether or not they know it was him. As a matter of fact, it would come to be known that Stephen Griffiths did have illusions of being the next Yorkshire Ripper, of being the next big name, the next big serial killer. And it maybe is not coincidental that to be known as a serial killer you must kill a minimum of 3 victims. And Stephen had killed Susan Rushworth, Shelley Armitage and Suzanne Blamires. Stephen Griffiths was actually known to the police, and he was known to the apartment security and management, and Peter Gay, the security guard that had been reviewing the footage, had actually been told by the apartment manager not to approach Stephen Griffiths, as he was known to be aggressive, and he did usually turn towards violence if confronted, or if in any way someone made him mad. So immediately Peter Gay contacted the police with his discovery. Now this next section may be a little bit skew-whiff, maybe a little bit up and down, but bear with me. I just want to try and give you a tiny bit of history on Stephen Griffiths. So Stephen was someone that really authorities had their eye on. Just a shame, maybe not quite enough. He had a pretty normal childhood, and unfortunately his parents actually separated when he was quite young. And Stephen never really got over this. He actually developed a hatred for his mother, very much blaming his mother on what had happened. His mother wanted to sort of rediscover her youth. She went out a lot, she partied a lot, and Stephen was the oldest of 3 children, and he was not very happy at his mother's behaviour. He didn't think she cared for them as well as she should have done, and that deep-rooted hatred of his mother started from about the age of 12 or 13. Now, if you're into sort of true crime, if you know your serial killers, you will know that that is quite a common thing to happen. Serial killers that have issues with women, that kill women, that hate women, generally the issue tends to stem from deep-rooted hatred of their mother. And in this case, in Stephen's case, this most definitely was the case. Stephen grew up doing the usual that you would expect from someone that would go on to become a serial killer. He routinely would shoot birds, but not content with shooting the birds, he would take them home and tear them to pieces. He would take them apart to see what was inside. He described himself as a loner. He was very much a loner, and something that really does stick in my throat, he was a regular at a rock club, which I was a regular at myself. I never saw him, I didn't know him, but a lot of people that are into sort of an alternative lifestyle, rock music, which I am one, do tend to bond together with that feeling of being a loner, of maybe not fitting into society. Now, I was socially awkward, I was a bit of a loner. I certainly was no Stephen Griffiths, but he went to that same club, Rios, in just outside Bradford, and it's just scandalous to me to know that he frequented the same place that myself and my friends, people that were very loving, people that were very... If you know your rockers and your alternative cultures, and it spans across to bikers also, they tend to be very accepting, loving, nice, decent people if you can get past the tattoos and the long hair and, you know, the gothic appearance, whatever that may be. But Stephen Griffiths was a loner for a very good reason. He never really gelled with anyone. He was very intelligent growing up, attending a very prestigious grammar school in Wakefield, but he never really bonded. He never really made friendships. He always had issue with other people. He had issue with control. He was very cruel as a person. People felt uncomfortable around him. And at the age of 17, he was actually caught shoplifting, and in response to being confronted by a member of staff about the shoplifting, he actually slashed this gentleman's face, leaving him requiring 19 stitches. He did receive 3 years in like a juvenile prison for this, but he went on to later threaten 4 young girls in a library on his release because he felt they were laughing at him or they were making fun of him. When confronted by one of the fathers of these 4 girls, he threatened him with a knife also, and he actually went back to prison for 2 years. Following this, he was actually diagnosed by a psychologist as having schizoid psychopathy. This was 1991 and Stephen was aged 22. Stephen, unbelievably, had actually got a couple of girlfriends. One specific girlfriend he had been dating for 2 years, and she had been under the impression all this time that he lived with his mother because she had never been to his house. And one day Stephen asked her, "Would you like to come to my flat?" She was very surprised to sort of know he even had a flat, and she went along. As I said, they had been together 2 years at this point. Her name was Zita Pinder. But when she went into the flat, her blood would run cold. Now, when I read this, initially I thought, oh, maybe people would have issue when they come into my house. She was confronted with shelves and books and hundreds of books about serial killers and true crime. He had a collection of samurai swords, he had a crossbow, and he had a massive fascination with horror. Now, this is odd because most people I know that are fascinated by true crime, which includes myself, and if you're watching this, probably includes yourself, I am a massive horror fan. As a matter of fact, my channel, up until quite recently, was a horror movie review channel mostly. So does a person that is fixated with true crime and with horror just automatically mean you're some sort of weirdo out on some kind of vendetta to kill people? No, of course it doesn't. But Zita Pinder just felt that what she was looking at was very contrary to the Stephen that she knew. She said he was very gentle, he was very kind. Doesn't sound like we're talking about the same person here, but she said something about that flat just completely spooked her. All those books, and I don't mean a few books on true crime, I mean hundreds of books about all the infamous serial killers. He had a fascination. And also, when watching horror movies, if someone was dying very horribly, he would find this absolutely hilarious and would laugh uproariously. So that in itself does sort of beg the question, is there something weird going on? After having seen the flat, this girl that had been dating Stephen for 2 years made an excuse. She said that she had tummy ache, could he take her home? He did, and she promptly split up with him immediately. She just was very uncomfortable, and she thought that there was a lot more to him than she was perhaps previously aware. Now, Zita Pinder was not the only girl that Stephen dated. There had been several complaints to police by ex-girlfriends of Stephen Griffiths, including things like he smashed glasses and slashed their legs, he poured boiling liquid over them and burnt them, he slashed the tyres of their car. There was one particular girl that Stephen dated for quite a long time, and he just worked in that usual way of separating her from her family, her friends. And when she eventually split up with him, and he had treated her horrendously, when she was originally attracted to, she said, his intelligence, and he was kind and gentle, as had previously been said by Zita. But when she eventually did find the bravery to split up with Stephen, he stalked her for years following. He left horrendous voicemail messages. In 1 minute he would be begging for her back and telling her how much he missed her, and in the next moment he would be just callously calling her every name under the sun.
That's all I want. Why it is you think I did all that shit? At least have the decency to text or email me what it is I am supposed to have done. I really miss you as well, Cafe. You've had the police on me, but I still care about you. And it really hurts that you think that I've done all this stuff.
I was bombarded then with messages, phone calls. I was absolutely bombarded with them for attention.
If you're going to blame me for doing things to you, then I might as well start doing things to you. Alright? You've got so many enemies there, and you want to add me to them.
One of the voicemails he actually left was just him laughing manically, and it just, the girl said it made her blood run cold.
But I don't mean laughing, he's cackling.
So there were definitely signs that people should have been keeping a very close eye on Stephen Griffiths, and as a matter of fact, the police were said to have been watching him for 2 years before the point that these murders occurred. As I've already said, Stephen was very intelligent, and ironically, Stephen actually was studying for a PhD in psychology, and his project was in criminology on 19th century crime patterns in the local area. So this guy was studying murderers in his area, and he would go on to be a murderer in his area. I don't think you can get much more ironic than that. So at this stage, Stephen has actually murdered 3 young women, and Peter Gay has unearthed the CCTV footage of the final moments of Suzanne Blamires. We're on the 25th of May 2010, and a shopper is walking along the River Aire in Shipley, as I have done many times, and he sees a black rucksack bobbing in the water. In his curiosity, he retrieves the black rucksack to see what may be inside, and to his horror, there is a human head in the rucksack, with the crossbow bolt still embedded, and also with a knife embedded. Now, before I go on, I would actually warn you, there is description of body parts of what perhaps happened to Suzanne Blamires, so if that's something that you struggle with, possibly don't watch the rest of the video. Let's get back to the story. So unfortunately, this would be the remains of Suzanne Blamires. She would need to be identified by dental records, as horrendously, Stephen Griffiths had actually skinned her head. He had removed the hair, the skin, the ears, everything had been removed from her head. It has been later suggested that he actually did eat these body parts, as DNA material was actually found on the stove in his apartment. So police dredged the River Aire for any further evidence, and they came up with 81 pieces of Suzanne Blameyre's body. He had actually dismembered her into 81 pieces. Along with the discovery of Susan Blameyre's remains were also 2 pieces of remains which later were to be identified of those of Shelley Armitage. I have read online in a few different cases. I'm not sure if this is 100% the case, but it was a piece of thoracic spine and a chunk of flesh of Shelley Armitage which was actually discovered. The remains of Susan Rushworth have not, still to this day, ever been found, and Stephen Griffiths refuses to tell anyone where they are. If you've actually seen the interview with Stephen Griffiths when he was first arrested, he just sounds like he's on a different planet. He's speaking in riddles. He doesn't make sense. He won't answer any question directly. And really, it seems he is trying his best to make himself appear to be some sort of infamous criminal, someone that's going to go down in history. And really, it just comes across to myself as pathetic.
Why did you feel the need to kill her?
I don't know. I don't know if I'd say just sometimes you killed someone to kill yourself or kill parents. I don't know. It's like deep issues inside me.
In the same river where the remains of Shelley Armitage and Suzanne Blameyre's was found, they also found a bag with several tools, which had also DNA material of the woman on. Also, obviously, very closely searched his apartment following his arrest. He didn't put up any fight with regards to his arrest. There was a very much an armed police presence sent to arrest him, but it went very quietly, very quickly. He knew they were coming for him. As a matter of fact, he seemed to want them to come for him. He wanted the infamy. His freedom was not as important as the world knowing what he had done and who he was. In his apartment, the police actually found DNA evidence from all 3 ladies. So even though to this point they hadn't, and they still haven't, found the remains of Susan Rushworth, and they don't know exactly what happened to her, Stephen Griffiths did admit that he was responsible for her murder, but they needed something evidence, something concrete to go on, because this guy could just be taking responsibility just so that he fit that criteria of serial killer. But they did indeed, unfortunately, find blood evidence in his apartment that belonged to Susan Rushworth and would have been incompatible with life. So Stephen Griffiths actually submitted a guilty plea in court, and when asked his name, he uttered the Crossbow Cannibal. So that moniker was actually given to him by himself, and he actually said that he had eaten parts of his victims. He had cooked parts of his first 2 victims, and it has been said by himself that he actually ate a portion of Suzanne Blameyre's raw, that he didn't actually cook it. Stephen Griffiths is still in prison serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole. He has in that time gone on hunger strike, and he has attempted suicide on 6 occasions, and unfortunately to this stage has not been successful. Something that I find the most disturbing in this case, obviously the murder of the 3 ladies is disturbing in itself, but what Stephen Griffiths actually did after he murdered Suzanne Blameyre's, after he had dismembered her body, he took her out of his apartment in black bags in a rucksack, and he travelled on the train to Shipley, the train that I rode on many times. And he was on that train aside other commuters, other passengers, with body parts in a bag. As a matter of fact, on one stage, one of his neighbours had actually seen him with a bag and said, "Oh, what is that smell?" And he said that it was his pet lizard. He had 2 pet lizards, which he walked like dogs. And he said that one had died and he was going to bury it. So she was aware that there was something in that bag that did not smell normal.
I actually met Stephen outside of the buildings where we lived, and I noticed a smell, and I said, "What's that smell?" And Stephen had told me it was the dead body of the lizard in his rucksack, and he said, "I'm just going to take this and bury it away somewhere."
And she had actually, another little depth into his psyche, she had actually been invited round by Stephen previously to see his lizards, and he would show her his lizard biting a live pet rat, not biting a live baby rat in half, in two, and she said it made her feel sick. He found it hilarious. I think he found her reaction to it even more funny, and he said, well, that's nature for you. He seemed to enjoy it. He didn't see it just as nature like anyone else would. He revelled in how disgusting it was and how much it disturbed a normal person. Another point to note about Stephen Griffiths is that he actually was found on his phone to be in ownership of a video he had taken of one of his victims in the bath. He had spray painted sex slave on her back, and he videoed the whole grisly what happened to this individual. And he'd obviously kept this as a trophy, and the police found this on his person. There also were found images on a digital camera within his apartment, so there was never any argument as to who was responsible, that it was him himself, and this guy just was seriously sick and in need of being put away for a very, very long time. To end the story, I think it's very interesting to speak to someone or to hear from someone that actually was very almost a victim themselves. 45-year-old Christina Miliano was actually picked up by Stephen Griffiths. She was a sex worker also, and he took her in his car with the windows blacked out by black bin bags, and she said that there was just a feeling that something wasn't right. He didn't speak to her. She would ask what music he liked. She would mess about with his cassettes in the car to try to get him to speak. He wouldn't look at her, and she just had an overwhelming feeling that something was going to happen. He drove out of the populated area into a very remote area, and she knew in that moment if she didn't take some form of action that she probably would never see the outside again. As Stephen reached downward, she said what looked like he was about to grab something. Two car lights came toward them from the other direction, and very quickly and very cleverly she thought on her feet, and she said, "That's my boyfriend. He always follows me. You better let me go." And with that, Stephen Griffiths believes her and thinks they've been followed, and he lets her out of the car. She runs and flags down the next car. She said if they didn't stop for her, they would have run her over. She was in the middle of the road. They took her to Bradford police station, and she gave a statement. And on that evening, she never worked. She gave up her work as a sex worker. She never done it again because she knew how close she had come to dying that evening. And she never saw anything of Stephen Griffiths until one evening she was watching telly, and up he came on the screen. The Crossbow Cannibal, responsible for the murder of 3 sex workers in the Bradford area. Now that must have been chilling stuff for that lady. And to end the story, on the 21st of December 2010, Stephen Griffiths, self-moniker the Crossbow Cannibal, was sentenced to a life in prison on 3 separate murders, with never the possibility of parole. He is serving his sentence at Wakefield Prison, and the only downside is that his suicide attempts were unsuccessful. He's breathing air that really he doesn't deserve to be breathing. I don't think it will ever happen, but it would be nice if Susan Rushworth's parents were actually told what had happened to their daughter, where she was, so they could bury her. They have asked him on numerous occasions, and he refuses to give up that information. It seems to be the last vestige of power that he actually has, and he is holding on to that. The man is just sick and twisted. I know this is a case that was shared very recently by another YouTuber, and possibly several times in the past, but to start with, I've been trying to do cases that I feel are personal. I have a link or affiliation with. This did happen where I lived and worked, and I was very disturbed at the time to know that that person had been on that train that I sat on many, many times, and had attended that club, with that little niche club with people that I attended it with, and it's disturbing and scary. So yeah, I hope you found the case interesting. Hopefully there was something there you maybe didn't know, or got a little look in from a different angle of someone that walked a lot of the same paths as this guy. If you have any requests for any cases you would like me to cover, I would very much like to sort of look into those for you. And I would very much appreciate a like, a subscribe. I'm trying to grow my channel. It's very small at the moment, as you can see, but I would love to sort of get to know more of you, do more of these cases and build a relationship. So thank you so much for watching. Be kind in the comments, and I shall speak to you next time. Over and out from Lisa Lives.